to the Frontier Beyond Fear blog talk radio program. I'm Susan Larison Danz, and I am just so delighted to welcome you all here for another prime time show of the Frontier Beyond Fear. And in just a moment, I am going to bring our guest on the line. I see that he is out there, and I just want to give Jason Gregory an introduction. Jason is the author of the new book, The Science and Practice of Humility, The Path to Ultimate Freedom. And Jason is really quite the expansive, heart-based thinker, and I'm not even sure I want to use the term thinker. He is a spiritual philosopher, and he is a scholar, so I guess very much a thinker based in the heart. He is a writer. He is a teacher. He is going to explore for us tonight some teachings from both Eastern and Western philosophy and really help us to reflect upon these things in a new way and perhaps in ways we've never heard before. He has studied ancient civilizations. He has traveled extensively, and his website is jasongregory.org. And without further delay, I'm going to bring Jason onto the line. Welcome. Takes
Hello,
just
Susan.
a second to connect. There you are.
Great
nice
to
to have
be on the show.
Yes, nice to have you back on the show. We had a brief time together a few nights ago where I'm just so happy to be bringing you in via Skype from a foreign, I don't want to say a foreign land. There is no foreign in this world, but from far away and yet very close. So welcome, Jason.
Oh, it's great to be on, Susan. Thanks for having me.
Well, I am very honored to have you here. Now, I realize as I enter into this program that terminology is meaningful here because, space only allows me so much when I'm defining a title for the show, and yet you really spend some time exploring this concept of the science of humility, and then, of course, flowing into the practice. So I thought perhaps tonight that's a good place to begin, to explore what this means to have a science of humility.
Yeah, it's a great question. Because of my work, and I mainly focused on studying a lot of the sages, especially of ancient times and also some of the 20th century, is you find that there is sort of an attitude that every sage has, which is a sense of humility, and it's a sincere humility and almost a prolonged humility. Most of us experience humility some in particular parts of our day, but not at a prolonged state. So I was curious about this and obviously explored it for many years. And my belief is that there is a science of humility, but it only comes forth through the enlightened mind. So someone who can see, you could probably say, the impartial perspective of life. So see that there is no right and wrong in life. There is what there is in all life. So this also comes back to also Eastern thinking too, because in the East, a lot of people think round, so think in circles, you could say, so non-linear. And in the West, we think in a linear way. So, this is why when you're in, say, India or China, if you understand the language, if you speak, say, Chinese or Sanskrit, the language is almost backwards to what English is. So there's a very roundabout, indirect way to get to things. So, this also, it comes through the way that humility is expressed through a sage as well, because they don't see things as absolute. They see things as change. They see everything as change. So there's no sort of definite description of reality,
Now, I know that for many of us who have come from traditions that very strictly define duality, and I came from that background, from a very conservative background in the United States, and I think that that's something that you help us to explore, Jason, and many of us are opening up to this throughout our lives, and it's certainly been my path, is releasing these things that maybe we cling to, and it can feel, to say it in a good way, rather adventurous to release duality, and yet not an invitation to act contrary to love. It's actually an invitation to act, well, actually, you explore this. I'm going to let you explore this, because you talk about the shadow, too, in your book. So it's really, how do we work with this? Those of us who are learning, how to move beyond the notion of duality.
Well, it's a tough thing. Obviously, as you said, that I grew up in Australia as well, so very conservative culture, much like America, and coming into a lot of Eastern philosophy, and also my last 10 years in Asia, there is that the dual aspect is not really embraced as much in the East. Like, we could see in India, if two people get into an argument, 5 minutes later they're friends. I often refer to this as like dog psychology, because when you see two dogs fighting, 5 minutes later they're playing together, and you see this in India. You see this in India especially. There's not much clinging to the aspect of that I am separate from you, and I can be isolated from you. And in the West, we develop a culture where Jason is separate to the whole world. I'm isolated to the world, and I should fight for my existence. Now, this is not, I don't want to say that this is wrong, but the thing is with this, it can lead to gross individualism. So without appreciating that, I'm nobody without Susan and without the world. So, how do we come to that? And I think the Eastern teachings have explored this more, because to them what was more intrinsic was harmony, was how I relate to society, how I relate to the other, and also how I relate to God, or whatever you want to call it. And so there was always an emphasis on resonance, on building resonance with that which is bigger than you. So, and in that you sort of release a lot of your own egotistical tendencies. Your self-interest is sort of pushed into the background, and I feel that this is a really pure way to approach reality, but I don't want to exclude individualism. I think individualism has great things to show the world. What I'm seeing at the moment is I'm seeing both worlds come together, and a new psychology that is being born from that. But I think that at the moment it's just gross individualism in the world. So there's too much self-interest. There's too much me. So I think that we have so much to learn from the East in that perspective.
Yes.
And also to get back to your question about the duality, seeing reality as dual is almost it's a perceptual thing as well. So you've got to be sincere in your own introspection. So once you start to explore the nature of your own being, the nature of how you relate to another and how you relate to the universe, then that should have a refining effect on your consciousness. If you're sincere in the approach, and then the things like this and that, right and wrong, will begin to sort of not be so strong within your mind. You won't cling to things like that should be that way, that should be this way, because this is where duality begins. It begins on a perceptual level, and this is actually why the great Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi said, he was a philosopher around the warring states of China. He said that Qing is our human essence. Qing is a Chinese word, and human essence is what separates us from the animals. But he said within this human essence, we have a flaw, like we are almost faulty as humans, and the fault is that we have the ability to discern between this and that separates us from the Tao. because when we begin to discern between this and that, subjective opinions come in as what is right, what is wrong, and as we know, right and wrong are really subjective. They're not a complete picture of reality in the way things actually are.
Yes. When, so often, Jason, we hear talk of the ego. I know you talk of the false ego as well. And, that seems, that's a word that many of us have worked with, a concept. And I wonder if you could reflect on where the ego fits into all of this, and where the individual truly is, and what is false ego and illusion.
Okay, false ego is really, you could say, probably just the identification with your beliefs and your concepts, and like I said with what Zhuangzi said, the ability to discern between this and that, and these type of things separate us from each other and from the universe in its complete picture. And so, I don't want to say that, a lot of people associate the ego with the body. And it's not so much that, because, we all have a body. If we don't have a body, we don't experience reality in its multiplicity. But the ego is really just, it's a framework that we've built in our mind, a psychological framework that we cling to. And the problem is because of that tendency, we're not open for change. We're not open to allow new experiences in. I'm not allowed to grow and change my beliefs. And, this is why in the West actually, they loathe contradiction. But in the East, the East love contradiction, because contradiction means, if you are contradicting yourself, it means that you are growing. It means you're changing. You're evolving.
Yes.
So if you contradict yourself from last year to what you're saying now, this is a beautiful thing, and it's embraced in the East. But in the West, because of our definite description of how things should be, we always point the finger. Aha, they contradicted themselves. But it's not so much a bad thing. So, if we can sort of open our consciousness up more and begin to refine those beliefs and those concepts and those tendencies that we have to keep us divided, if we begin to really work on that, then we can begin to sort of shed a lot of that psychological baggage that the ego contains that keeps us separate. So this would lead in. This would be the false ego, and that would imply that I'm referring to something else, which is a true ego. And I would say that the reality of the ego is the individual in resonance with the universe. So, I speak about that a lot in the book with mental alchemy and ancient words like dharma in Sanskrit and de in Chinese, which these words are referring to virtue. They're referring to that you've given your ego away, you've sacrificed your false ego, I should say, and you've connected with something much larger than you. And when you connect with that someone much larger than you, then we could say that this is the true individual, or the true ego in its perfect characteristic.
Yes. It seems like when that happens, we are in service in a way, in that many of the great masters, if we think, so I find myself, I'm going to stop myself right here. What happens, Jason, I find, with these concepts of really reflecting upon oneness, I find myself using words and then saying, that's not quite what I mean, because it's a separation. And for example, a real classic, I use the word foreign. Well, I stop myself immediately. That's a really old habit from a long time. I haven't even used that word in ages, and I thought, gosh, how strange to use that word. But so I'm stopping right in our tracks here, because it seems the more we explore this, the more that we feel this really deep desire within to come into this space of harmony and to release things that, and I know, see, I'm doing it again, trying too hard, that doesn't necessarily work, but see what I mean? But what I'm trying to get at is the question: do we become more mindful in a way? Do we really start to say, when you talk about how if we're contradicting ourselves, that's a good thing. We really start to question and say, I might have said that last year. I might have used that concept, but I'm not so sure I want to embrace or speak of that anymore. And so pretty soon, it actually becomes a journey just to try to express concepts in the same framework that we once understood. Everything is shifting. So I hope I captured that. It was somewhat holographic in a way, talking about the language, but I feel it happening more and more, where I see the things that link us together, and I don't want to be in that space of separation, and I feel myself growing into that direction, albeit imperfectly.
Well, in the imperfection is perfection, Susan. So
yes.
it's a great thing. And like what you said with language in itself can be an inadequate tool to describe a lot of these things, but we're compelled to talk about it. It's like the very first words of the Tao Te Ching. Lao Tzu says, those who speak of the Tao do not know the Tao, the eternal Tao. But then he goes on to write 81 more chapters, and so you could only say that he's getting at the point that the plane of imagery in our mind, where the concepts and the language and everything that's there, it does eclipse us from the non-dual reality. But at the same time, we can use, once you understand that, I think we can use the words, we can use that to relate to each other, if we can come to an understanding of the terminology, of what we're trying to get at, what we mean, what we feel. And then I think that we can really marinate in, as you say, that oneness of the universe, and really get back to away from separation, that everything that divides us. So we do need to be mindful. Yes, language does eclipse that, but at the same time we need language. Language is a great thing. It's a beautiful tool that came from the human mind, and so I don't see any reason why we can't use that to reflect on who we are, to contemplate our own existence, and also to try and eventually, hopefully, have a peaceful world in the physical realm. So we always can never just explain what we mean sometimes, but in other times we can. And so I've got no problem with language and how it separates us in some sense, but it comes back to, I think, it comes back to understanding that plane of imagery. That's what they call in Zen Buddhism. That plane of imagery that's in your mind, that's just what keeps you away from it. So if you know that that's not who you are deep down, you can use that as a filter to relate to the world and not be stuck to it.
Yes. I think what I'm trying to get at is I feel my conceptual framework expanding. And so so it goes beyond language. It's deeper than that, although of course that's how we express ourselves in language, is that we feel this tendency towards growth, where the old ways, just as you express in your book, the old ways of thinking about things, what may be our own rigid structures that were embedded, we find ourselves releasing it. And sometimes for me, it's a very conscious process where I stop myself and realize, no, I don't really embrace that, whatever that is. And so I do find that happening, and it's a more conceptual experience. Now, here's one that we can explore for sure. I know you talk in your book about, and this is very popular right now, to say that what we think about, what we want, we will get, and this instantaneous gratification, as if that this is the desirable thing, and yet you speak of this, and then you talk about this concept of alchemy. And how can we better understand, Jason, manifestation, or how we navigate through reality, and how we we are receptive within it? How, because you talk of receptivity as well.
That's a great question. Well, it's commonly known as the law of attraction, the art of manifesting, which most people would know from books like The Secret and so forth and so on. But, and obviously all of those people who have been involved with reading those sort of books over years and years know that there's some truth there, but it's also veiled with a lot of, things based on just purely materialism, about becoming rich, about being somebody in the social life. And this is actually not the ancient teachings, actually, of, I don't even like to use law of attraction. I use mental alchemy because that's how it's described in the Hermetic philosophy, which it came from. And, the whole process of, like you said, being receptive in that is about refining your consciousness, emptying out, and then when you begin to have a still mind or have an empty mind, it doesn't mean you have an empty mind all the time, but it means that you're not sticky in your mind. You're not stuck to old habits, stuck to old beliefs. It means that the universe can use you then. And then, in Sanskrit it's called dharma, and in Chinese it's called de. And this is basically a cosmic virtue that begins to almost drive your life. This is what drives someone, say, who is a writer, who can sit down for 8 hours and then their conscious mind disappears for like 8 hours, and then they have like a whole 2 or 3 chapters sitting there, and they go, I don't even remember doing this. This is the process of it. A lot of people call it the zone. A lot of people, refer it to the way that the Tao works within Chinese philosophy. But from that perspective, it's not really about gaining anything for your personal ego or your conscious mind. It's about resonating, it's about aligning with the universe and expressing your own innate nature. Susan's own innate nature could be a great radio host, and you're bringing that forward into the world, and this is what's bringing harmony to the world. When you're not following your own nature, you're following your desires, your attraction for personal gain, and all this produces is disharmony, and you're actually out of sync with what's really happening in reality. And so, the process is to get into what I call the great work of eternity, which means to start to be introspected, start to see how you are actually, in some sense, out of sync with other people, out of sync with your own world, out of sync with the universe, and not focus on trying to gain something for self-interest. This is the problem with a lot of the law of attraction work out there. It's about self-interest. I want to be a great speaker. I want to be a great filmmaker, and so forth and so on. But if you really refine your own consciousness, you don't really have the concept of self-interest. What you're doing is you are expressing what Joseph Campbell would say is your own bliss. What actually makes you feel like you want to get up in the morning. You feel like it makes you feel alive, And this is what brings harmony to the world. And actually, in Chinese, there's a word exactly for what we're talking about called yin. Mm-hmm. And yin means that if you follow your dharma or your de, you begin to. It's almost metaphysical in nature, where you begin to bring harmony to the world that's immediately around you, and this has a ripple effect, obviously. But there is a lot of differences between true mental alchemy and probably the popular books on law of attraction. So I would probably say, people who are interested in that, into the art of manifesting, is that the first thing that you have to do is get out of self-interest. If you get out of self-interest, if you work on your ego enough, then the world does become magical, and you experience it from a very deep place, but not from your conscious mind.
Where do synchronicities come into play, Jason? So many of us experience this when we're really in what many of us call the flow. We experience remarkable things, really, that are impossible, seemingly impossible, and when we're resisting, I feel that many of us really can embrace this concept of dharma, because you really feel it when you're resisting your path. It's almost physical. It gets to be that. I mean, it can be. You can feel the stress of, and I guess it's the separation from your true path. You feel that. And so, but back to my original question, could you speak to synchronicity, Jason, and how that relates to all of this?
Well, I think synchronicity is like the language with following your own path, which is how we experience it, Susan. That's how you experience the magic and the wonder of life. When those miracles happen, that you say, "Come on, there's no way that could happen." It's 1 billion to 1 shot, maybe 1 trillion to 1 shot that could happen out of all the things that could happen in the world. But they do happen, and you see it happening. I've been around some really great people in my life, and when you're around them, you see that these synchronicities and that it's just like it's a daily language. It's happening all the time, and that's because they're in people commonly call it the flow of life, or in ancient times they would say in the way of the Tao, and so you're in this sort of this path that the universe is expressing itself through you. It's your path, and as you're following it, it's almost like the unconscious is conspiring against your conscious mind. It's conspiring against you with reality. So you're experiencing this almost physically, and you do experience it physically, where you see these magical and these magic miracles and that. Yeah, you do, and and that's the beauty of it. And most people don't experience it because they fall into a life that is dictated to by the social and cultural needs, and so the universe in a sense. I don't want to speak for the universe as I'm a mouthpiece, but I think that the universe can't use you if you're not following your path. If you're following an ideological path that suits other people, you won't experience synchronicity. But if you follow a path that really makes your heart shine and you feel alive, you will really experience the magic of the universe in your own reality. And a lot of people say that that's metaphysical or too new age, but once you've experienced it, that you cannot deny it because it happens almost daily. Yes.
I find, Jason, that it can seem really illogical too to people observing it. Maybe the best example I can give in the popular culture is Field of Dreams, the movie where he does something totally contrary to what makes any logical sense. But because he's able to see a path, and actually he can't even totally see it at first. He just knows that he's guided to another path, and so I think that it can seem very illogical. Like how people will even question, and so I guess here's a question coming out of this is when we are feeling that we're aligning with our true path, and then we feel resistance around the masters, that their stories can often be where people are questioning them. Some as many as followed, or I don't know if followed is the right word in some cases, but there were those who learned, and there tended to be some resistance as well. So I guess the question for those of us here in the modern world on our path, how do we navigate through that in the most peaceful way and within the space of humility? What is the way through that kind of resistance around us and judgment?
Well, it's very tough work on a spiritual level because we all experience, especially those who are really introspected and are sincere on their path. You do feel resistance, and you do feel those around you. They may even be cynical to your own life and the way you are in general. I would say don't invest too much energy into their reactions to you. And I know it's tough, but it's in those sort of situations, you've almost got to just let go of, yourself in that moment. Let go of your conscious mind, you could say, and they themselves have a right to their opinion, and that's good. But usually their opinions are usually directed towards something which results as a judgment. and you could point this out for them, or you could get into a debate about that. But I kind of take the Eastern approach to this. A lot of people in the East would say if someone was directing a judgment at someone who was on the path, or so forth and so on, they probably wouldn't say anything. They would probably just think, because they see things as in a unified whole, they would say, well, maybe he's got some points there. Even if he is.
Yes.
Maybe even
just
if they are being.
Be.
Yes. Just let it be. And I know that's easier said than done, but it is some of the best spiritual work you can do on your own character, because you need to understand deep down that those people in the future will contradict themselves, because they might find the path themselves, and then they might come to you later on and go, you were onto it. I apologize for the way I was, and everything comes full circle, I believe. So I guess that if you can understand that the only feeling that we have within ourselves that actually feels resistance from them, that's actually the false you. That's the one that's the actual false ego that's clinging to the actual real you, the one who's on the path, who could care less what anyone says. So it's the false you going, hey, shut up, like this is my, you really want to get into a fight. But if you can be, if you can be conscious and step back and see that, and in Sanskrit they call this viveka. They call it the ability to discriminate between who you really are and the plane of imagery that you think you are, the beliefs and the concepts. And even I'm a spiritual person can be a concept, So when you start to step back and see that, if you have that ability to have that discrimination, then you won't get into too many arguments, and you won't feel, if you keep doing this work, if you keep that sense of discrimination, you won't feel your blood boiling, you won't feel the tension in your shoulders when someone's being rude to you. You just sort of let it go. It's like, water off a duck's back. You just keep walking your own way, and, understand they have the right to their own opinion, but, that doesn't matter what they say. You live your life to the best you can and the most authentic way, no matter what they say.
Yes. And, when you speak of freedom, that truly is an expression of freedom to pursue our paths authentically. And I love that concept of saying, yes, I can acknowledge that someone has an opinion about it, if someone has their own way of thinking about whatever my path is, but, it doesn't influence choice to live as authentically as possible. And it is a process. I mean, because, you can have people very close to you asking, what you're doing, because it doesn't always, in our world today, and you speak to this, that simplicity isn't necessarily viewed as the path that many of us follow. I mean, life can be very complex, and, just with the normal, I put in quotes, paths that many of us are taught to follow, get a career that will support you. I'm a person who had a very successful career, a master's degree in technical discipline, and, worked in the technological world and all this, and yet that's not my path. That was my path. It had a purpose. I see the purpose more and more, but my path right now is very much different, and I'm flowing into it. And so, there can be this tendency, especially when we're young, to influence us, or even actually at any age, to conform to the cultural norms and to make a living in a certain way and all that. And so anyway,
definitely, yeah. It's the cultural norms and the social norms are, as children, you and I are not to know that anything about life in general, like, because we're not taught, about wisdom at a young age. We often get taught how to conform to society. So, there is always going to be a tension with someone, especially when they start to seek freedom, because when you start to seek freedom, you're seeking it outside of the social the social norms. And so, in a sense, you're becoming non-conformist. And so,
yes, very much so. Yes.
Very much so. And I think that the authentic spiritual path, in a sense, is always going to be non-conformist, because, it's as Zhuangzi said. He said that, you can be in society, but the thing is that you don't operate from the motives that drive society. So the desires and all of the things that actually separate us from each other and from the universe. So, you can live in a city or anywhere, so to speak, but you don't operate from what's socially accepted or what's culturally accepted. You're starting to step into a much more authentic path, which reflects your own nature. So, how can, this is one question people should ask themselves. How can one path, which is the social and cultural order of the world, be right for everybody? Because it can't be. Because it's just one way that we're all supposed to live. So I think that that's a ridiculous notion that we are all supposed to follow this one path that's set out for us. And in most cases, it doesn't suit any of us. And you can see this with the mental illness in the world, with the stress and anxiety levels in the world. It doesn't suit us. It's too fast-paced. We're simple creatures. I like what I forget which psychologist said this, but he said, we're not digital, we're analog, our brain, but we're trying to make it digital. We're trying to be at the speed.
That. Yeah.
we're trying to be at the speed of a computer, but our mind is much more simple in its nature. So, I think that we need to get back to that simple nature, and once we begin to look within, then, you might become a nonconformist, but it doesn't mean that you don't hate the world. It means you're just living your path authentically.
Yes. And you'll feel it because you'll be fueled by pure joy. I can remember what it was like. I would work a long day in the office, and I would be utterly exhausted. I remember that feeling of exhaustion sometimes. And, sometimes it was very satisfying, on a certain level. But, I don't have that happen very much anymore. Unless I'm really going through resistance. And yet I can have very, very long days, what people would consider a long day, and yet not in the same way. Just doing a variety of things related, and they're generally related to the spiritual work that I'm engaged in. And the day ends, and I'm still, sometimes I have to tell myself to go to sleep because I tend to work late and that I'm right back at it. So I have to, but I get out in nature and things. And I guess that's the other thing too, and let's reflect on that as well, is what can we do on this path, and what do the teachers have to say about what we can do to nurture ourselves, whether, meditation, reflection, walking in nature, which for me is my way of connecting.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. Yeah, see, we're so disconnected from nature, so that's why, once anybody actually goes back to nature, they feel the clarity of mind come to them straight away. Their nervous system begins to relax, and there's just that stillness that you can't, it's hard to conjure up when you're in an office or in Wall Street or something like this. But I think that the four fundamentals for, say, personal well-being, and a lot of teachers do advocate this, is having a healthy diet, meditation, just moderate exercise, but also rest. So if you keep those four in sync in your life, then you should have complete well-being, and having a still mind and being present more and more loving should naturally arise. But the thing is, we're so busy, so many people these days are so focused with, especially the digital world. So we're becoming further and further away from nature, as what we alluded to. And so, and it's funny when you ask people what was your most memorable experience in life, and they would always say, a trip to the Grand Canyon or the Amazon. So it's always to do with nature, but half the time they're on their laptop or their smartphone or they're watching TV, completely disconnected from what's really happening around them. And so, all the masters would advocate those four things that I mentioned, and to obviously embrace more being present in everyday life, listening more. I like the idea of listening deeply, because when you begin to listen deeply to someone, you're getting your conscious mind out of the way, which is always ready to speak, even when someone else is speaking. So if you become more aware of that, then you can listen deeply to the other person, sympathize with them, where they're coming from, even if you don't agree with what they're talking about. But you can do that. And so these are just simple practices to, to come into more of your heart more, and be in reality more. And, but with those four things, it doesn't mean you go off one more into the other. Like, you don't start exercising every day and try to become a bodybuilder. It means, you keep a moderate exercise. It means you keep good health, and, with your diet, you keep a good healthy diet. What suits you? There are numerous diets out there that suit each person's constitution differently. And, whatever meditation practice that works for you. And, also the rest. Make sure that you get adequate sleep, and just try to get out of the busyness of the world. I heard this interesting thing about digital sunsets. So at 6 o'clock, all the electronics are turned off. No phones, no computer, no TV.
Wow.
And at night time, it's just time to relax. Maybe talk with your spouse or your kids or your friends.
Yeah.
Read a book. And actually, when you look at this from, say, a Taoist perspective, that's the yin energy of life, the nighttime. So at night, you should actually be in a yin actual attitude. So you should be more relaxed, which is more of a feminine thing, to relax and to just be receptive. And daytime is yang. Daytime is masculine. You're out there, you're vibrant, you're doing a lot of things. And this keeps good balance in life. And actually, what you'll find is, if you practice, say, digital sunsets, or you take as outrageous as it might seem to most people, take a week away from the phone or the internet or anything like that, and just see how you feel after 1 week. You'll feel extremely great. You'll be relaxed. Your skin will be, your face skin will be much more relaxed. There won't be tension in your body. And these are just easy things to practice.
Yes, I think that many of us can learn from that, and we tend to know too when something's out of balance. Like I do have to remind myself about sleep. That's probably one for me, in that I may be doing something which doesn't feel like work to me, which is interesting. I mean, I may be kind of working, and yet it's not exactly work. Of course, my day is unusual. I realized the other day that I'm actually, on many days, part of my schedule literally is walking for multiple hours out in nature and then stopping. There's a place where I like to stop and reflect, because it's very peaceful out there, and it helps me. Each of us has our own way of connecting. And I realized one day, this is literally part of my schedule. And I don't know that I want to think of it that structured, and yet it is. I mean, I need to, and our modern society, Jason, doesn't get that. They don't necessarily get, that people need to take time for things like this, and then it makes the rest of my day really much more focused, whatever it is that I need to do, because I spent that time. And, maybe we can't do this every day. I can't do it every single day, but I really, on the weeks where I get too busy and can't make time for things, I feel it. And my effectiveness goes down. Even within the flow of enjoying what I'm doing, it goes down if I don't give myself that time for reflection.
Oh, definitely. And, like what you said, Susan, you go for a nice bushwalk in nature, and instantly you're back into mindfulness. You can sit and you can be completely present. And
yes.
What most people don't understand about even just the fundamental ways that the brain works, if you can give yourself that time to just be mindful for at least 5 minutes a day, this actually is beneficial just for the preservation of intellectual life. So if you're always just in the intellect, always busy, 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 you're going to be stressful, anxious all the time. But if you give yourself that time, some people believe you only have to meditate 1 minute a day to preserve your intellectual life and to help your own well-being. But I'm a lover of nature as well, and I love what you mentioned as well is give yourself that time to walk in nature, maybe even barefoot, walk in the mud, or just embrace it for what it is. People might call you a hippie or whatever, but who cares?
Oh yes.
Nature is us. Nature is what we're from. So people who call people hippies and that for being a lover of nature and who can feel the natural world are pretty ignorant, because we are nature. That's who we are. And we're an expression of the planet. So
yes, very much so. It's truly magical. I mean, I will literally, I have certain places where there are trees where I will lean up. I'll lean against the tree. My entire spine I will put up against the tree and just lean back, and that can be so powerful, Jason. I get dizzy. I mean, it is energetic in nature. It is. Just aligning with a tree. And it's I don't know, it's a simple thing to do, and yet it can put you in a really blissful state of mind, truthfully. And so for me it's very meaningful. And people can call me a hippie or whatever, but it's exactly where I need to be to stay balanced. Now, I have a question that I would be remiss if I didn't ask this question. Is, you speak, we've been talking a lot, very spontaneously tonight, about different practices and how we flow through life and our days. And you speak specifically of the way of the warrior and the path of the sage. And I'm thinking maybe now we can come full circle through some of this conversation and kind of map the way that we go to those concepts, the way of the warrior and the path of the sage, and to understand, how we can practice humility in our lives.
Well, look, the way of the warrior, as I describe it in the book, is it's kind of your normal psychology. It's you travel through life, you see things very analytical, very intellectual. I always say caught in the detail of life, caught in what's happened, and also caught in the detail of your own mind, your own beliefs, your own concepts, your own opinions. And this is what continually keeps your perception locked into this and that, right and wrong, good man, bad man, all these judgments that keep us in constant conflict with each other. And so, as we've been talking about today with refining the consciousness, the practices, being contemplative as much as you can and mindful, will begin to refine your consciousness and begin to have what I say, the path of the sage, which is an evolved perception. You can use an analogy, and a good analogy is a city. When you're on the city street, all you see is crazy chaos, cars beeping, people everywhere, and this is the warrior state of perception. They're caught in the detail of everyday life, mundane life. But if you were to take a Boeing plane's perspective of the city, this is like the sage's perception. They can see that there's an intrinsic harmony in life, a rhythm to actually what's going on. There's an order to life. And when you have that perception, you're not really clinging to the idea of judgments, right and wrong, what you think is good and bad. These things are kind of dissolved because you can see reality as it is. It's like an old Zen story where it's a famous one. You probably know it, where a father had he had a horse, and the horse ran away, and the neighbors came along and said, "Oh, how unfortunate for you, And he's like, we'll see. And then the next day, the horse comes back with 2 wild horses. And so they're like, they couldn't believe it. And then, they said, how fortunate for you to get 2 more horses. And he said, we'll see. And then the next day, his son was riding the wild horse, and the son fell off the horse and broke his leg. And so the neighbors came back around and said, "Oh, how unfortunate for you." And he's like, "We'll see." And then the next day, the conscription officers came around to conscript people for war. And because his son had a broken leg, he couldn't go to war. So, the story goes on and on and on like this.
Yeah.
Because the father can see that, everything's not definite. You can, life is constant change. The substance of life is always changing. So when you try to isolate it into a box and say, "Oh, how unfortunate for you," you should have really the attitude of "we'll see," because you never know what's going to happen. I've found myself, and you would have experienced this too, Susan, that in your own life when unfortunate circumstances have happened, they have always led to something greater. And you can say without
absolutely.
So without that unfortunate circumstance, you couldn't have had the fruit that came later, the sweet fruit that you experienced later. So
very true.
They're very true, because when the sage, they have their perception evolved, they can see that at all times. And this is what I go into the book, is that a sage has sort of a prolonged awareness of this, where all of the worries in the world, the ordinary people are always caught in the detail, and this is always driven by the ego, by self-interest, and this is what's killing our world. Actually, it's what's causing war, causing communal disharmony, family disharmony. And so, if you can be sincere with yourself and try to see things from a more clear perspective, this world can be anything it wants to be, but we have to be sincere about doing it.
Yes. Oh, so true. Jason, I've been so enjoying our conversation. I've been ignoring my switchboard, and I realize we have a caller on the line who's been waiting rather patiently, and I wonder if we could take a question from a caller real quick here.
Yep, sure.
Towards the end here. Hello. Welcome. You're on the Frontier Beyond Fear.
Hey, Susan, it's Jay calling from Canada. How's it going?
Hi, Jay. I thought it was you. I saw you out there. I thought you might have a question for Jason.
Yes, I do. It's great to have this guest on, because it's always really interesting to listen to this wisdom and knowledge that he's traveled along his road on his journey. So it's very interesting.
Nice to meet you, Jay.
Yeah, thank you. My question regarding the path. I'm struggling with this one. We're on the same path, yet we individualize our paths as being our experiences are individual. But is it say that we're all on the same journey? And I don't know, we seem to divide, make it individual journeys, but is that still true nowadays?
Well, I feel that we are all on our. I think it's a paradox. Like it's another Eastern contradiction. It's where we're all on an individual path, but that's also in a sense, what could you say? Like it's resonant with a unified path. Like so, from a purely subjective level, from your own personality, you could say, yeah, this is my path. But probably from a higher perspective, it's just, it's like you scratch your leg. It's just what the universe is doing through you. So, like they talk about, especially in Hinduism, about having one will. So you align to the universe, so forth, or whatever you want to call it, and then that one will begins to work through you. So then, from their perspective, their philosophy, they talk about, well, do we really have free choice, or is there just one will working through everybody, and we're experiencing it, subjectively? So, these are great cosmic questions that it's hard to answer, but you can probably answer it yourself by living your own path and seeing that when you're sort of aligned with something larger than yourself, that it's harmonious with everything else in life. So if it's harmonious with everything else in life, then it's not just your path, it's also everybody else's path as well, because if it was just your path, it would be very isolated and you would probably never come into any conflict or any friction during your life, but it sinks in with everything else. So it's almost built into the fabric of the universe, and it's very harmonious with the way things are. I don't really know if that answers your question or if that was to the point, but you can elaborate if you want.
Well, we actually
probably
should. We should probably. I think that's all we can ask right now because I'm realizing we've got Jason here via Skype, and I may lose him right at the top of the hour, and we wouldn't want that to happen. So, I really thank you for calling in, Jay.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Jason. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And Jason, you're still here, but yes, thank you, Jay, for just wanted in the last few minutes, because often we have a little bit more leeway on the phone. I wanted to give you an opportunity, Jason, to let people know where they can find you. And then, of course, I wanted to thank you from my heart for being here tonight. We could only brush the surface. There's so much to talk about here. But I'm so thankful that you've been here tonight and for the work that you've done.
Oh, I appreciate everything you do, Susan, and for giving me the opportunity. And it's been a great conversation. I love it. And I love exchanging with people like you, and I think it really benefits a lot of people out there. And as for my work, if people want to find out more about me, they can just go to jasongregory.org. And also, I'll be speaking in the UK and US in September and October. So anyone who is interested in coming to any of my lectures, they can go to my website and find out information. And it's been brilliant.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And we'll look forward to your visit here to the U.S. Perhaps when that gets a little bit closer, we might talk again. So because
I'd love to be back.
I would love that. Oh, well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate just the spirit of your work and the depth of your exploration here. I want to remind the listener, The Science and Practice of Humility, The Path to Ultimate Freedom. And truthfully, I have much more to explore in it as well. It's a really beautiful book with much to explore and to teach. So thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you. A pleasure.
All right. Well, take care then.
Okay. Bye, Susan.
All right. Bye-bye.